Yeah, thank you for coming. I'm quite excited that a lot of people are interested in this topic because it's kind of widely used around in other technology stacks, in digital and web development. And I really want to, with this session, to bring this over into AO world as well. So we had two presenters here planned, only one on stage. Unfortunately, second one didn't gonna make it. So we will see him virtually. So as you're in a cinema, be ready that there will be part of the session where you guys will see it as a film.
Hello everyone. Sorry for not being able to be there in person to deliver the session and enjoy and connect with everyone. I tried my best. Next year, I will be there for sure. Let me introduce myself. I'm Chandrasekara, lead technical consultant at Theta. Theta is like one of the largest BC partners in the ANZ region. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I got my first award 2016 while I was back in Sri Lanka. I specialized in AI development and extending and integrating Business Central with use of Azure integration services. I am originally from Sri Lanka but have lived in Auckland, New Zealand for past 7 years with my loving daughter and wife. I hope you will enjoy our session. It's over to you, Vlad. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Vlad. I'm working with Tharanga in Theta in New Zealand. We are quite a large partner, as Tharanga has already mentioned. In our practice, we had like 45 people in BC world. I'm originally from Ukraine. We actually had two speakers in this session from Ukraine, and we kind of competing. He's in another room talking. So be free to reach me out on GitHub or Twitter. So the topic for today would be kind of trying to introduce BC community into what the feature flag approach is. You might heard about this as with other names like feature toggles, feature switches, release switches, release toggles. So, and actually sometimes they're referred as a trunk-based development as for this kind of approach as well. What it is, in a nutshell, it's just a way for you to enable or disable your features without modifying the source code or without redeployment. And the key word here is kind of this redeployment phase. We usually talking about deployment and release as kind of synonyms. Sometimes like, let's just release to this environment, let's deploy to this environment. It's kind of the same thing for us. But it is actually two completely different processes, where when we talk about deployment, it's actually packaging your code in an app file and moving this around to some other environment or into your artifact storage. Where we're talking about release, it's where you're actually taking your feature and presenting this feature to your users. I'm kind of like this analogy, thinking that deployment is your Amazon, that's the delivery guy dropping the bag to your door, where the release is your Christmas dinner, where you're unpacking this kind of Christmas presents and show to your family. So what the feature flag approach allows you to do is actually decouple these two processes and control them in separation. We had a few use cases where we can use this approach, and one of my favorite one is the continuous integration process. Continuous integration is actually hard to do, and you're always trying to balance between some of your key goals when you're doing this. So you're kind of prioritizing, do I want to get my feature as fast as possible, where I'm kind of doing, is it my lead time of my feature delivery should be fast enough, or should I have availability defined correctly, so then if anything crashing, I can just take my main branch and ship it to my customer anytime. Or I wanted to make sure that my quality is defined correctly, so my test isolation is valid, so there are no features that overlapping or crash in my test environments. And in common pipelines, you're kind of balancing, trying to find what's the right approach, what's the right balance for you. And so with this in mind, let's look into typical pipeline that kind of trying to implement this balance. So we start coding with our two new features. We have two developers working on feature A, feature B. It's kind of 2 days for each features to be delivered, to be coded, sorry. We are doing development and separation in 2 separate feature branches. Feature A completed first. We kind of can integrate it into our main branch. It's so good, and it can already go into our testing phase. Because we prioritize a test isolation as in our definition for our pipeline, this is where feature B is blocked right now. We cannot integrate it to the main branch because potentially we wanted to make sure that our test environment is clear for anything else. So this is where feature B should be blocked for a whole time when the feature A is going through the testing process. It might be buggy. We can decide to say, okay, we can roll it back, but team can just sit and say, no, we wanted to just have a quick fix to it. So let's just work for a quick fix and integrate it quickly, where the feature B is still blocked. We get our fix integrated. Finally, it's arrived in our test environment. We did our testing, and we move it to UAT. So this is we finally able to unblock the feature B and integrate it into our main branch. And then move it to testing process. So you've seen that the feature B was kind of blocked for more time than it was originally developed. Then feature A is quite a buggy, and our users didn't accept it. They said, okay, we sort of mean a little bit different from what your consultant understands. It happened. So please rework it and make it completely different. So this is where we actually need to roll back. And because it's a change into our current main branch, we again put in a feature B on a blocking phase. We kind of cannot proceed with testing. We need to make sure that rollback successful before we can proceed with testing for feature B. We'll wait for rollback, and now we can get back finally to start testing for feature B. Yep. And then we can pass it to a UAT state. So this was a typical pipeline, and you can see that like feature B kind of stuck in a blocking phase for the same time as it was spent for development for it. And of course, it's delayed our release for feature B, and this is not what we want to do. So let's try to look how this pipeline can be transformed with the feature flags. Similar way, we have two features. We're developing them in parallel on specific feature branches. You can see this kind of marks. I'm trying to identify where the feature flagging for them is enabled or disabled. So for both of them, they're enabled. Developers working in the isolated feature branches. They're doing some testing, unit testing, so on. When they're happy with it, and similar as a previous time, we can integrate feature A. We're integrating it without feature flag enabled, so it's not affecting our runtime. It's not affecting any other process that currently happening with our main branch. And we can move it to a test routine as well. And this is where we kind of can enable this flag only for a subset of our users who is taking care of the functional testing for our extension, for our feature. This is where our feature B can be integrated as well, because as it's coming in this kind of disabled state, we are not affecting any other environment, so our test isolation requirement is still complied. And this is where we can even pass a feature B in a testing environment to be tested in parallel. We can just identify that this feature is enabled for another subset of functional consultant who's taking care of testing our feature. And we're doing our testing. Feature A fail. We're just instantly disabling it. It's not affecting feature B, which is going right now on a UAT. And we can wait for a fix to come in, because technically it's not affecting any runtime right now. Feature B was successful. We moved feature B into live already. So there was no blocking time. We managed to do it in time, as expected, as it was promised to our customers. We finally get our fix integrated. We did a regression testing for feature A. It moved to UAT, and so on and so on. So you can see that in our case, with the feature flagging approach, we can stop compromising between these aspects of our delivery pipeline and actually achieve all the three aspects of it without any trade-offs. So there are other use cases where you can use the feature flagging approach. Through the previous slides, you guys already seen the controlled rollout process or progressive delivery. This is where you're rolling out your feature to a bigger subsets of users. In a first phase on a testing environment, it was just our functional consultant. On the next phase, it can be just the key users. On next phase, you can actually deliver, if it's an app source app, you can probably get it to some countries, and then maybe roll it out globally. And with the feature flagging approach, you can actually have like a same environment for it. So we might have single sandbox where we are running our internal testing with functional consultant, as well as the same sandbox for UAT. Another good use case is a kill switch. Again, we've seen it before on previous slides. Wherever your feature is broken, wherever there are some complaints about it, you can instantly kill it. You don't need to spend time on rolling back this change and actually stressing your team about it. And this is where this is probably my second favorite one. Another one is actually something completely outside of our ERP world. We kind of don't like the idea to do any experiments with our users, but it might have certain cases. In Tita, we are building a monetization solution for our partner, and we always debating about what should be a sign-up flow. And this is kind of our key UI process. And in some point in time, we come to the point that we kind of cannot make it this decision. What if we will wrap two different flows into feature flag and actually release it globally and say that 50% of our customer will get one flow, another 50 will get another one. We plug in some telemetry to this process and see which one will actually work. And then as soon as we come up with an idea of which one will work, we actually put it as globally available for everyone. Another one is user targeting. This is where we're talking about more permanent flags, where we're saying, okay, now our features should be permanently available in an environment. But the good use cases for it, your app, you wanted to deliver one app into app source, but you wanted to break this app into two different pricing plans for your user. You might have like essential pricing plan within your app and more advanced one. And you wanted to have this limited set of users available for essential one, and the business plan would have all your features enabled. And you can use a feature flagging approach for this as well. Another use case is launch on time. This is actually the first use case which we use in Theta for feature flags. What we did is we developed, as part of our key extension, we had a dynamic announcement feature. Idea is that it's a notification behind a feature flag, and the content of this notification sits in Azure Key Vault. So in case if, for example, we need to announce something to our users, we can go to Key Vault, configure what kind of announcement we wanted to do, like what message, what action they need to do. They might like our backend service is down, so they need to wait for 2 hours while we're fixing it. So we go into Key Vault, we're correcting what we wanted to show to the users, and then we go into our feature flagging system and actually defining right now we wanted to show this notification to everyone in the world who had an IT manager role or admin role. So then the right users are notified about our downtime. And one other nice use case is the early access. What is this about is, let's say, the way how you're doing changes into your application in app source is you kind of come up with a design, you think that this would be a better user experience for your users, and you package it, you pass to app source for validation, and boom, your customers get it. They might use to a previous UI. They might like your previous UI more, but in most cases, they are not ready for your new UI. And this is where early access has its value. So idea is that you push in your changes with your new UI changes behind a feature flag, and then you're allowing users to decide when they wanted to enable this feature. So then kind of can schedule their training with a user, schedule any process, and it's kind of decoupled from the moment when you are actually do the deployment. This is actually a use case which Microsoft using for their feature management. This was the original driver. You've seen that for a SaaS environment, Microsoft had this kind of moment of, we are deploying a new release. And they identify that it's actually a challenge for most of the users in the world. So they decide that any kind of dramatic UI changes should go through this early access approach. Now over to Tharanga to kind of talk to you about this.
Thank you for the introduction to Feature Flag. It sounds very promising and should be able to resolve many of the development and deployment challenges we face as partners. Saying that, does Microsoft use the Feature Flag approach at all? Or do they use a different approach? Let's try to find it out in the next few minutes. In fact, Microsoft does use Feature Flag approach quite heavily with the Business Central releases. In the past, when there was a new version of NAV or a Business Central, users or partners had no option to enable these functionalities or features manually. As soon as the tenant or database upgraded, all these new features, functionalities are enabled, whether you like them or not. But with the new feature management module, users and partners get to select which new feature should be activated first. Why does Microsoft go ahead and implement such functionalities into BC? They could have implemented all the new features and then let the user experience it, all of them together as in old days. It's simply because Microsoft recognized that most users will not be able to accept dramatic changes in user experience, which Microsoft is going to deliver within each major release. The idea is to wrap all future dramatic user experience changes into switchable feature flag and gradually release them with the next 2 release cycles. This approach enables Microsoft to disconnect environment upgrades from worrying about any client and partner pushback due to new features. Using feature flag dramatically improves SaaS platforms' stability. It enables Microsoft to keep all the tenants with the latest version without breaking user experience. Let's imagine a world without feature flag for a moment. Microsoft upgrade all the tenants in a single day. From the next day onwards, there will be many complaints from the users and partners. Partners will also have a very hard time since users and consultants are unfamiliar with the new features. They would not be able to carry out day-to-day activities without training on new functionalities and processes. Sometimes, even the existing functionalities will not provide the end result that they used to provide prior to the upgrade. With the feature flag, all these limitations and barriers are handled. Now we know that why Microsoft used feature flag approach to release new features. Let's see how we can find out these upcoming latest features before they end up in BC. As a partner or a user, it's very vital to be on top of these new changes. There are a couple of ways to find out this information before those features end up in BC. One of the most efficient way to work is work with insider builds. Microsoft release insider build very often, and partners can download this insider build and explore them to understand the latest changes. Another option is release plans and roadmaps. Microsoft released these documents way ahead of actual releases, and with that, partners and end users can get to know the confirmed upcoming changes and plan for that. That's also another option. That is just wait for the upgrade and then check them on your tenant with the sandboxes. Let's see how we can do that. In order for me to show that, I need to go to Business Central. So I'll open my browser and I will refresh that and I will log in. So this is my Docker container, and if I search for feature management in here, it lists all the available features and their current status. By using this page, you can try some features by yourself without affecting other users. But there are some features you cannot try by yourself. This means it will be for the entire organization once you enable it. Also, some of the features cannot be turned off once you turn them on, especially if it's something related to data upgrades. If you look closely, it shows when these features will be automatically enabled as well. In the other word, forcefully enabled by Microsoft. We will talk about that later. Let's take an example that I want to try this model action by myself. So if I want to try it by myself, what I do is I'll click this try it out action. It will open a new browsing window and it's asked me to log in again. And once I log in, it will give me the new experience of model action bar in this browser page. So let's go to the sales orders and see whether it's actually working. Yeah, it does work. Now I can see the modern action bar in here. Let's say that I'm happy with this experience and I think, yeah, it looks good. I would like to enable it for all the users. So all I have to do is I go back to this feature management page and then enable it for all the users. And let's say I need to read more about that before I enable it. So I can actually click learn more and it will take me to the modern action bar Microsoft Learn page, and I can read it through and I can understand what are the impact of each of these features. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slide. We discussed why Microsoft used feature flag. Then we discussed where you can find the upcoming releases, upcoming features, and lastly we discussed how to enable and disable features within BC. Next, I want to take your focus to talk about Microsoft release cycles briefly. How long can company hold off without enabling these new features? And how does Microsoft release these features? Microsoft implement these new features as a part of its release process. So with the major and minor releases, Microsoft released new features into Business Central. You can read about them in Microsoft release plans. Let's take an example. Let's take an example of a feature released into BC on November release. Till the next major release, which will be in April, that newly added feature will be optional to use. But after 6 months of initial release, Microsoft will enable it whether you like it or not. That means as a partner or a user, you get 6 months to try it out, train your users and consultant, and also to adjust your business processes. Enabling a feature ahead of time allows users to explore and benefit from new functionality before it becomes widely available. It also allows users to be part of the testing and bug identification process as well. By reporting issues early, user can contribute to improve the feature and also its stability and performance. Having said all of that, one of the major benefits is that user can learn and develop new skills associated with the feature before it goes to production. This applies to the partners as well. Partners will get enough time to train their staff so that staff will be well equipped to support the users if necessary. As a partner, how would you know which of your customers are actually using these new features and who need more support? That's where the telemetry comes into play. Let me quickly show you a quick example of how you can use the telemetry to identify who's using these new features and who are not. So if you have seen or if you have been active on LinkedIn, Twitter, or any social media into that matter, you might have noticed these heaps of posts from Kenny about Business Central Telemetry app with Power BI. It's a free app you can install and configure. Let me quickly show how it works and how it looks. If you go to feature usage in here, it lists most of the available feature flag in Business Central and some additional telemetry data. Also, it shows which customers use each of these new features. It gives a better view to the partners to make themselves ready and also to make customers ready for the upcoming upgrades. Let's take example of a modern action bar. So I find modern action bar in the feature usage statistics and I click that, and now it shows me all of the customer tenant IDs that actually use the modern action bar. It even shows like on which environment they are using it. So with that information, I will be able to decide that, okay, these are the users who are actually actively using it. So if you think that they would need a training and that would actually help them, you can contact them and propose that we can do a training on you about this. But if there are customers who are actually not using it, you can talk to them and you can actually make them ready for the next version upgrade of Business Central. You can install this app by going into Analyze and Monitor Telemetry with Power BI, and if you scroll further down in here, you will have the this link, and once you go there, you will be asked to install it, and once you install, you will get the sample data, so you can have you can get a better understanding, and once you are ready, you can configure it with your telemetries, and then that report will actually help quite a lot. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slide. As an ISV, handling a newly added feature by Microsoft can sometimes be very challenging. For example, if that new feature is going to cross-path with one of the modules that the partner has developed, then the partner needs to take necessary action to ensure that once the feature is enabled, user will have a smooth experience. So that's where the feature-aware apps comes into play. Feature-aware app is an app partners develop, but it executes different logic or implement changes to the user experience based on a feature flag. Let's see the benefit from the partner's perspective. based on newly added features, regardless of whether they are enabled or not. A partner or ISV developed solution should work because it should cover both the options of feature enabled or feature disabled. If the app covers that, the user will have a smooth experience using your developed solution, and your internal support team will have fewer worrying phone calls or emails to deal with. Let me show you how it works. It's a simple way to handle the changes, but a very effective way to keep the customers and your support team happy. Let me go to Business Central first. In my solution, what I want to achieve is, when I enable the Convert User Group feature in BC, my new page action should pop up a message saying that Modern Permission Provider enabled, or else it should pop up a message saying that Legacy Permission Provider enabled. Let me go to my new page, and my new page called Get User Permission. So if I go and click Get User Permission, it says that Legacy Permission Provider enabled. Now if I go back and then I said, okay, I want to enable it for all the users, and I go to my page, User Permission, and then I click Get User Permission in here, it says Modern Permission Provider enabled. So that means my app can understand whether the feature is enabled or not. Based on that, I can make decisions on my app on how to run my logic. Let me go to Visual Studio, open my interface. I have an interface called User Permission Provider, and within that interface I have Get User Permission as the procedure signature, and I have two implementation of this interface. The first implementation is Legacy Permission Provider, which returns the Legacy Permission Provider label, and the other implementation is Modern Permission Provider, which returns the Modern Permission Provider label. And then I have a code unit. In that one, I have a set user permission provider function or procedure. In here, I have defined two variables. One is the feature management facade code unit as a variable, and then the other one is a feature flag for the user group. You might be wondering, how did I get this hide legacy user groups value? It's quite simple. If you go to Business Central and go to feature management page and go to the feature that you are interested in, and then go Ctrl Alt F1 or the page inspect view, and then you can copy that value from the ID field. And with that value, what I'm doing is I'm using is enabled function in feature management facade code unit and pass that, and the feature management facade will take that value and it will do all the checks and give me the information about whether the feature is enabled or not. With that information, my program will understand and decide which implementation of the permission provider should be used. And then I have a page. Within this page, what I do is I have page action. I actually call that procedure that I showed you quite a little bit earlier, and then it assign the interface, and then I'm using that interface to get the message about which interface actually being implemented. So it's quite simple, but it's also quite powerful as well. With this kind of simple approach, partners and ISVs can provide very smooth user experience to the end user, as the solution will work with newly enabled feature or even without it. If you want to access the code I showed you, you can access the URL below, or it will take you to my GitHub, or you can scan the QR code as well. It will take you to GitHub as well. To recap, you can use the feature management facade code unit to understand whether the feature is enabled. It is simple as passing the feature key to function. Once you pass the feature key to the feature management facade, it checks if there's any data upgrades running or have been completed. After all those checks, it returns the details about whether the feature has been enabled or not. If you are currently not catering to both the possibilities of feature being on and off. I hope I convinced you a little bit to change that approach and handle both possibilities within your app. With that, I will hand over to Vlad to continue with the rest of the session.
Thank you, Tharanga, virtually. So I hope we can understand what this approach is about and how Microsoft is using this. And this is where I wanted to kind of help you and probably guide you on how, on our experience as Tita, how we start this, and what kind of practices we build up to be able to implement it into your organization. So I break this into two kind of areas where you look into processes and the tools. So from a process perspective, I strongly recommend to start from the understanding of where and what is my features. We strongly not recommend to have your features on a bug level or a story level. Task is out of scope. So this should be on a kind of high level within your backlog. It's either on an epic side or a feature. Then you've seen that we are doing, in the example for the feature flag, we're doing this kind of integration. This is part of your pull request review within your pipeline. So what you're introducing as part of your pull request review is this isolation check. So the reviewer should be able to go through all the scope of the change and see how this functionality is properly wrapped into your feature flag. So basically what he should be checking is all the subscribers, all the interfaces that your change is implementing, any kind of UI that it's introducing, actions, pages, and page extensions. Another one is we wanted to make sure that we're defining what is the lifespan of your feature. There will be an absolute mess if you don't have a proper culture of defining how long my feature would live in my environment. If it's a short-lived feature, I would recommend you to link it to wherever your release cycles are. It's probably, let's say you're doing some agile and your iterations is 2 weeks. You can probably tie it that your feature will live within your iteration plus another 2 iterations. So you wanted to keep it in your live environment for another 2 iterations to make sure that wherever you rolled it out to all your users, you are sure that there's no complaints, you probably checked the data, there's no some performance gaps or anything like this. So you need to build up this kind of policies in advance. It helps your team to be able to manage your features as well as build up this customer expectations properly. When we're talking about iteration, one more thing is they usually treat in 2 types of features. They're permanent features and a short-lived one. So again, depends on your use case. You might have a permanent feature, but you need to clearly define that this feature is permanent. I'm not expecting to clean this up after features goes out. Depends on your scenarios, and this is where if you, some of the use cases for feature flagging is actually provide your users with your feature early, allow them to test it. And we strongly recommend you to define this feedback loop. In my organization, when we start using the feature flagging approach, in a parallel, we actually provide our users with a portal where everyone in the world can actually report the bugs to us, and they can kind of see publicly all our issues and see how we actually prioritizing them and moving them into the release phases. And that's, it's an interesting one. We are in ERP, we kind of don't have customers who wants to have changes. And you probably will see some kind of negative feedback on this approach from your consultants. I had a case, actually, this was in Malta. When we were kind of rolling this out to our team, I had a frustrated functional consultant comes to me and said, so you guys will drop some rubbish feature in our release to our customers. And my only answer was, yeah, kind of, I'm safe to do this. I can safely push it to production and show this to someone, even like if it's 2 key users, and allow them to try it in a different company within their manufacturing process. Yeah, this can be unfinished feature. So, yeah, in terms of tooling, that's actually an interesting one as well. Microsoft feature management is closed from other partners to contribute within their own features. It's mainly done because the feature key table, it's a system table, you cannot modify it, it's invisible kind of to you. You cannot insert your new feature. Before this session, we actually had an interview with Microsoft, and we were asking them what kind of plans for them, what they have in mind for a feature management. And what we discovered, they actually had 2 plans. One is they do want to enhance it, and we didn't see this in a roadmap today where Vincent was showing, but we had some dates where in April 2024 releases, they plan to enhance it. There was a recent enhancement for feature management. They introduced an option to build up dependencies. That's a scary part of it. And it looks like that Microsoft will have challenges to build up some dependencies between their features. We don't have plans for Microsoft in terms of releasing this to be used for partners. Hopefully, someday, this will be possible as well. You can do it by yourself. It's probably some of you already did it without knowing that you're using feature flagging approach. You might have a kind of Boolean field in some setup saying, this is a functionality that I wanted to work with. It's probably the Boolean valid for the whole organization or for a whole company. And then you're hiding number of your functionalities behind this Boolean field. That's probably not the best option. And this is where, within this session, we want to show you the tool that we built in Tita to handle our feature flagging. We call it Open Feature for AL. You can use this link to go to GitHub. It's fully open sourced, and we are taking care of publishing each of the releases into app source. So the way how it works, and the whole goal of this project was done as I was trying to kind of bring this approach to Business Central community by providing a workable tool to manage it. And it's actually relying on the tool or capabilities of Business Central that are already there, that allow us to conditionally hide or show some of the action, some of the user experience, depends on the user. You probably kind of guess what I'm talking about, and this is application areas. It's a little bit hacky, but on an interview we had with Microsoft, they actually said that they wish their feature management solution would actually work with application areas because it's actually a nice tool for this. We finally kind of find a use case for application areas, probably. So the way how Open Feature works is it's calculating what feature based on your condition you wanted to enable for your users, and then it populate your application area for it. It's pretty much simple as it. So if you wanted to identify any of your visible controls to build up it and make sure that the visibility of this control is controlled by your feature flag, you just define an application area to be equal to your feature identifier. The same you can do with actions, pages. So if you would put it on your pages that you introduce within your feature, user will not be able to even find this in a menu. Comparing to, for example, Microsoft solution where even if the feature is disabled, your users will still be able to go to this page and be confused on what is it about. When we come into the code isolation, you've seen in Tharanga's example, he was showing how you can use for a feature, for Microsoft feature aware apps, the facade from Microsoft. We kind of had a similar facade that you can use. Within the open feature foyer, we're actually enhancing this condition into bringing even some telemetry for you. So we are reporting telemetry for feature management if your feature is right now onboarded or not. And we actually can do more. I probably can show you a little bit more on further slides how we're using this. Because we are eventually calculating the application area, you can skip it, and you can just do the check if your feature ID is within the application area. This will be one less dependency for your app. So it's kind of cool if you need it. Cool. With this in mind, what I wanted to show you that why we call it open feature. And this is actually coming a little bit from a digital world. There was many services that was providing feature management capabilities. And there was no kind of single structure. If, for example, I build up some .NET application and I wanted to introduce feature flagging into it, and I'm dealing with LaunchDarkly as my service for feature flag management, I kind of need to hold with the LaunchDarkly SDK to be able to do this. And there was this kind of initiative to build up like an SDK that provides only like a client guideline and client side of it, and then you can plug in the service, which is in the backend, that handles your feature flag. And they call this open feature. And the way how we develop it in open source in our repo is sort of trying to follow their SDK guidelines, so make it provider agnostic. So then, if you guys will start using this, you can contribute and actually build up your own feature provider to deal with this app. As for current version, we built two providers. One we call conditional provider. And this is to be able to cover use cases for our per tenant extensions. So idea is that you have your application, and within this application, you introduce a new feature. So on install code unit, you would be able to use conditional provider API to say, this is my new shiny feature. This is a description of it. That's probably some kind of link that the user can navigate to get some more information about my feature. So then open feature will kind of understand this is what it is. We had a similar UI as for feature management, so users can go there, see what is it about. And in the conditional provider, you can build up certain condition when you want this feature to be enabled. You can do it through code. Where's my next one? Yep. So you can say, I want this feature to be enabled only for evaluation companies. Please add and maintain this condition. And then I wanted to make sure that my feature flag, which is my customer reward feature, is controlled by this condition. I have a slide for this? So let me show you how this looks like for one of the apps that we did. Oh, thank you very much. It's bright enough, hopefully. So what you see, it's an extension that Microsoft built. It's customer rewards. You might have seen it in the Microsoft documentation. It's used to demo you how you can do advanced testing. So what we did, we actually kind of take it with us. We were not comfortable to say that we are a Microsoft publisher, so it's Microsoft. mocking Microsoft. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It has a certain page extension, code units, and so on. But what I wanted to show you is what kind of changes you need to introduce into this extension to be able to wrap it within your feature flag using the Open Feature for AL. So, of course, for any new pages, the only thing that you need to do is to change an application area from your all, your favorite all, to where are your feature identifiers. Similar pretty much for all other pages that you're adding. In case if you had a page extension, you're defining any of your user experience, and you're changing again your all to your feature ID. And when, in case if you had a subscriber, this is where you need to use a code wrapper to again wrap your code base into if enabled condition. Similarly, if you had a subscriber somewhere in your code which subscribes to some standard code unit or wherever, if you depend on another SV solution, you can do this as well to make sure that your code is not running if it's not enabled. The bigger change actually come into installation logic. You can see here that in a previous version, we had on install code unit where on install per company, we did some data setup. We said, okay, set up some kind of default data somewhere. To be able to transform this into the wrapped approach with the feature flags, this is where you need to move it to some point where you can check if your feature is enabled or not. So this is where we're decoupling deployment from release. So this is where the moment where you're checking if your feature is enabled is probably not in the installation code unit. It's somewhere on login or on, we are probably, in most cases, what we're using is role center on open subscribers, sorry, events. So this is where I have my role center notification. If my feature is enabled, this is where I'm doing my data setup. We actually plan to enhance this to give you much richer capabilities to handle it, and we will provide our own event so you can subscribe and actually be immediately notified when your feature become enabled or not. And this is where you need to have as well some code to actually introduce your feature into environment. And as I showed on a screenshot before, you can use on install app per database. We are handling your features and condition for the features data per company false. So it's like we can build up rules for companies as well. It's like on top of it. So you can introduce your feature, customer rewards, and you can build up some default conditions. Actually, this is where I didn't show you one slide in the previous one. But let's deploy this one. Let me show you how this works. Come on. Yeah, works. You better be ready. So one of the features that customer reward extension is adding, it's adding an action to customer list to the home menu. We just deployed, so we run on our on install code unit, and I'm in a container, in a Chronos. This is the evaluation company, so my condition is valid. So I can see that here I have my action, rewards level. I even can search rewards, if I spell it correctly. Rewards, yes. That's it. So we have it in a menu. Now I can go to features. Oh, really? So this UI is provided by Open Feature for AL. You can see it's a similar list as a feature management. We have the ID of our feature. You have a description that allows user to kind of click on it and navigate to some help materials for your feature. We show in a state and which provider actually provide this feature for you. And because we tackling this for the per tenant extension scenarios, this is where we wanted to handle scenarios where you're doing your continuous delivery. So we allowing users to actually modify these conditions, come up and say, now, okay, this actually should not be related to relation, or you actually can skip the part where you're defining condition and code at all, and say, okay, right now, I do want to add a condition where I don't want to show this to an admin. So I said my condition based on user filter. It's not equal to an admin. Good. So we instantly showing you that right now this condition is not active. I'm an admin. So you can see how this condition, we evaluate them for your environment. We said, cool. Please add this condition as part of your condition to enable your feature. You can build up like certain set of rules when you wanted this to be enabled. And again, here it's disabled. I'm going back to feature. My feature become disabled as well. I'm going back to my UI, refreshing the page. No actions anymore for my customer. And similarly, if I'm trying to search spelling right rewards, nothing. So it's all right now hidden from users, but we didn't do any deployment change. We didn't do any kind of code change. It's just there. So let me go back to the slides, please. Cool. And this is the one that I was missing before. For the conditions, you have a UI in Open Feature for AL to define your conditions. As I mentioned, we actually doing two providers currently. Second one is a Posthoc Provider. Posthoc is one of the services that are available there to manage your features. And for us, what is the requirement is we are a ISV provider as well as a partner. We're shipping hopefully quite popular apps to an app source. And we do want to control our flags not per environment, but outside of it. So this is where we start using this third-party service. So we're defining conditions for our flags externally and allowing Open Feature for AL actually communicate to the service, read the flags, validate the conditions, and apply them to your application area. Yep. Now, in terms of defining features in a post-hub environment, you kind of not defining them anymore in your AL because all it's defined within a third-party service. So, but what you should do is you need to tell Open Feature for AL to, can you please connect to this service? And this is where on your install code unit, you need to make sure that you use the Posthoc Provider API to actually pass some information about how to connect to your backend service. Yep. And then all the magic in terms of defining features and defining your conditions for your feature Then going in the Posthoc, they had a quite strong instrumentation where you can build up these conditions. And can we move to my demo so I can show you how you can do this? What Open Feature 4EL is doing in terms of handling this provider, when we installing Open Feature, is actually going and streaming some information about your users to the Post Hub. So this allows you to build up the rules based on some of these user properties. Any information about these users are anonymized, so you will not be able to match any of these identifiers back to your customers. The only, let's call it sort of a sensitive information that we are sharing is the domain of their email. Oh, that's good that I clicked this one, because sometimes I kind of show some random one. So Open Feature 4EL streaming some context about your user. So we are pushing like what localization they use, what the email domain, the environment, is it production, is it sandbox, is it sandbox environment, means like, if it's a SaaS environment or it's a Docker environment, what user license is, what version, and what profile they use. This model is extensible, so in case if for your features you wanted to build up this condition based on something else, you can extend this context. So we will stream some more information. So then based on these conditions, you can, they had this kind of concept of cohorts. I'm not sure this word, I'm not English speaking natively. But basically what you do is you build up rules based on this property. So for example, we had a rule for what is the Docker environment. So everywhere where the property of the user is SaaS environment equal to false, this is going into this group. Similarly, we had a group of IT managers or admins. So this is everyone who had a profile, IT manager or admin. And you actually can see we had a good customer base in the group of SaaS environment right now. This is where you can define your feature flags. So I mentioned already this dynamic announcement feature that we had. It's pretty easy to add a new feature. You just define in the identifier your feature and the description of it. And then you build up what conditions you wanted to use for this. And this is where you can define to what percentage of your users you are streaming this. So this is where you actually can say, I wanted to do it just for 50% of the users. The Open Feature 4EL will handle this consistency, meaning if we have streamed this for one user, it will be consistent that we always streaming back at the same enable state for your feature for him going forward. You can ask why I'm showing you this. It's not a Business Central, but in reality, all the services done in the same way. You will find a list of features, you will find certain user properties and certain groups and conditions how you can do this. It's just one of them. I mentioned one of the features that Open Feature is doing. We actually had we built up this provider as an interface with certain functionality, and then we implementing two of them. And one of these capabilities of it is actually capture events. So we can capture event when the user checking the flag, if the user getting disabled flag, and when the user clicking on the link about your feature. So then you can capture this kind of event. And this provider, they actually able to receive these events and visualize it for you to say how many of your validations of your flag was calculated as valid and how much is not. So then you kind of can get daily how many times we are checking if your feature is disabled, and you see that my current rules is only for Docker environment. So I can go here and set roll this out right now for everyone in the world, and this will start getting truth. So everyone in the world start getting our announcements. I don't need to redeploy. I don't need to pass another validation with AppSource, with Microsoft Team. I just can plug it in. So I mentioned that we built this on an open feature specification. I don't have a links in the presentation for it, but you just can Google open feature, and you can read a little bit more about this initiative. So now, let me show you how this works in code. Yeah, am I sharing? Yeah. So this is an example app that's basically responding me back on the same flag. That's my notification. You can see that I have a subscriber. Sorry, here is it. On before show notification for a role center. I'm checking if my feature is enabled. If it's enabled, then I'm enabling my notification. And if it's valid as well, then I'm showing the notification to my customers. In this case, I do have my install code unit. And as I mentioned before, I'm adding, using Posthoc API to define what is API keys, how it should communicate with the service. So let's try to deploy this. Hopefully this will work. If you've seen, hopefully you remember, I showed you that the dynamic announcement right now enabled for all the Docker environment. I am in Docker environment, so you actually see notification. And my notification is showing, can you please go and review our app in AppSource? So the user can go and put some sensitive review for us. If I go to features, this is where I can see that I have a new dynamic announcement feature. It's now in enabled state. The provider is my third-party Posthoc Provider. And I don't actually have any option to define my own condition for it, because this is where we controlling this remotely, not the user. Comparing to the conditional one, where you do have these conditions defined. Cool. So can we get back to slides, please? Awesome. I'm kind of controlling someone else. So that's our providers. Now, there are things to consider wherever you are going to implement the feature flagging approach for your organization. I'm not native English speaker, and I actually asked ChatGPT, can you come up with a proper wording for what I'm trying to explain? And I do find this in some organizations that are experimenting with feature flagging, and I call it decomposition overwhelms. You probably had this conversation within your organization when you had a big monolith extension and you come to your dev team and saying, you know, guys, I just been on a nice workshop for evolving your solution, and now I actually had a great idea that I need to break it down into small layers and build up a dependency for it. And this is a reaction that you will get from your team. They will be confused, and not because they don't like it or they're not comfortable with it. It's just they would understand that there will be more bits and pieces they need to control, they need to maintain, they need to deploy, and so on. And similar feedback I'm getting regarding the feature flag approach. It's actually adding another dimension into your management kind of process, into your delivery pipeline. You can imagine that in case if you had an extension, one monolith that you break down into multiple layers, you might have this feature primarily introduced in one layer, but then you might have in another layers some components or dependency or some functionality that's required for this feature. So the feature flag will introduce this kind of vertical dimension to your extension layers comparing to, horizontal. Yeah, where the vertical is your layers, horizontal is your feature flag, which are kind of across all your apps. What my recommendation for this to be is to start onboarding some, let's call it easy to sell scenarios. So as I showed you before in my organization, we start with a lunch on time scenario. This can be a requirement for monetization that you're saying like, okay, for our pricing plans, let's build this. It's so cool, we can wrap it. But as soon as this functionality is part of your deployment pipeline, as part of your delivery pipeline, it's much easier become to actually start trying some another use cases. Another things to consider, we might have a schema change. We kind of start living in a world where all our schema changes are incremental, and because we're targeting SaaS in most cases, so we're kind of already more comfortable with it. But to handle this properly, I would recommend to put a little bit more effort into your planning phase, where you actually plan your schema change within your feature, and hopefully you make the types and fields not limited, like don't do maybe Boolean in cases, start with enum right away, so then it can be more flexible. And you need, as an example, as I showed before, you need to move all your schema, your data migration into your when the feature is enabled subscriber. So then it's actually you are executing your data schema changes within the flag. Tharanga showed you a little bit how Microsoft is handling this. Actually, some of the Microsoft features required the data migration. So when you, from the UI, you enabling this feature, they're actually scheduling the background task that is executed to migrate the data. And Tharanga showed you the code where when you're running is enabled, it's actually going and checking if this job is completed. And only when it's completed, it's actually allow you to identify the flag as enabled. One more thing, because the schema change, you cannot like say, sorry man, I wanted to do this data migration just for this user. We don't know what the data this user will work. So in this case, please avoid any kind of user-specific condition. It should be the company or the whole organization. I mentioned already the feature flag lifecycle. What I didn't mention that this process actually introduced you another phase into your delivery pipeline, which we call a cleanup. And the idea of cleanup is you go and you getting rid of the legacy code that was there, as well as the conditions that you had within your code base. With Open Feature for AL, it's actually quite easy to do. You can open your VS Code and just run replace in all files from your feature identifier to all, and cleanup is done. But of course, you would need to get rid of some legacy code that was as an else condition for your code base. One more topic is feature flag dependencies. That's a complicated, and because of the composition overwhelms, we don't want to have the dependencies with our feature. The way how to mitigate this risk to have these dependencies is, first of all, within the planning phase, clearly define this separation. What is my feature is, what is affecting, and the feature lifecycle definition will help you to make sure that you're getting rid of this condition so your feature is permanently enabled, so there will be no subsequent dependencies within the next few releases. But that's possible, and things to consider. Key takeaways for this session that we had is feature flag approach, decouple release from deployment. Hopefully we need, as a community, start to separating these two words and use them in the right places. It's improved safeness of your delivery if you start using the continuous integration, continuous delivery use cases with the feature flag. And it can be handled with some open source tools. We are inviting you to contribute. Hopefully our code is not messy. We're not Microsoft, but still following some best practices. With this in mind, I really wanted to switch to questioning side. Before we start, I actually had a very good 2 questions in a Hoba app. Can we share my screen, please? If it's still possible. Yeah, please. No? They had a smoking break again. Oh, okay. There was 2 nice questions that addressed in an app, and that's for Marco Winzer, if I spelled correctly, and Stefan Maron. We had actually some presents from New Zealand to keep you hydrated. If you can come up here, I can pass it to you because they're actually heavy. Okay, you probably can come up to me. Oh, okay. You're here. Good. And yeah, so another guy looks like he asked a good question and didn't show up. But if you're somewhere there, please go and ask your question. Can we get back to slides, please? I don't have Tharanga online, so I will be able to answer any questions from his part of presentation as well. Yeah, so, yeah, I need to train my throwing skills. And we actually had a present for first 3 questions, so if you have any, just raise your hand. I'll get it addressed. Oh, I know you by name. It's not cheating.
Just simple question. The short-lived features, you mean like you had the legacy code and you have some new shiny feature and you just want to implement the one by one and then switch it off at some point, or is it something else?
Yeah, so short-lived features, we're talking about the use case for continuous integration. You implement your change, you decouple this change from your release pipeline. You push it, you define when it's enabled, you're doing progressive rollout of your feature as soon as you're happy with it. This is where you clean this up. Is it an answer on your question?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Actually, I developed the feature like 2 weeks ago, and with this one, I would use this approach, but it's already done, and we use some permission management to manage this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy you guys can reach out to us through the social network, and we can try to help you wherever you are trying to experiment with feature flagging. Throw it back, and I will try to throw you the t-shirt. If you don't like it, I can take it. Yes, sure. Another throwing. Oh, thank you guys that you are in the first rows, because I probably will not be able to handle the further one.
Yeah, so you mentioned that we should worry about upgrading when enabling features, right? So does that mean we should worry about downgrading when disabling features, and how exactly would we go about that?
That's actually a good question. Do you ever write any downgrade data script?
Yeah, because I mean, breaking changes are not even possible to downgrade in BC, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so as I said, this is a challenge. Right now, we're not addressing this challenge, and we're kind of doing this in a similar way as Microsoft is doing this. And if you want to try with a new feature using Microsoft Feature Management, what you're doing is creating a sandbox environment. You go there, you try your feature, doesn't work, you kill the sandbox, and you kind of going back to Microsoft. So similar way, in case if you include this as part of your continuous delivery and you wanted to try some new features, this would be in a separate environment. You're doing this trialing, testing, and so on, and this is where in some point when you are switching to production, you're sure that this is something that you're comfortable to move only forward and not going backwards. You might have a kill switch scenario, and this is where you consider this as an emergency case. Yeah? So the key to kill switch is we suddenly break in business processes. And the idea is I wanted to get an instant feedback in terms of killing this, bringing back users to a working state, and then I can incrementally deliver the fix for them. And yeah, there potentially would be this kind of data migration thing. And in case if you're handling this, hopefully the way you're doing the data migration, you're keeping the data in the previous tables. It's just a matter of this moment when you start using this feature. There might be that you start using new fields, you're not populating the old one. And yeah, this might be a challenge. But again, this is extreme case which allows you to kind of minimize the risk of your rollback and not like, oh, wait, I will spend a day to roll this back. So we had these cases before.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Not cheated one. This is the last T-shirt I have.
If you need to upgrade any feature, how you can manage that?
What do you mean upgrade? Sorry.
New feature, same feature.
Oh.
You need that very small thing. You don't need to remove it, or you don't need to disable.
Yeah. So I mean, I was showing
dependency, right?
So first of all, if I understand your case correctly, the slide that I was showing for continuous integration, where you had like your broken feature or wherever your user doesn't like it, and you might still keep it there enabled, but then you're delivering some enhancements for this feature. This is a scenario that you're talking about? Or?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, pretty simple. This is just a piece of code. You will have another pull request review where wherever enhancement you're doing, use a similar way. You check in if this kind of changes to your feature is wrapped into a feature flag to make sure that they are not like spoiled. And then you continuously delivering this for your UAT environment. It become part of your feature. So you don't need to wrap it into another dependent feature to kind of conditionally try this or try this. This become your one single feature. I doubt that you will need to kind of separately wrap it in a sub one, but probably we need to talk more offline, and you can kind of describe a little more your use case, because it might be interesting if you wanted to break it down. But yeah, in most cases, you're just enhancing your feature and you're testing this as a whole feature in the back. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, your last T-shirt. No T-shirt, but more questions? Oh, that would be row number 4. I will try my best. Yeah, can you then pass to the next one, please?
I'm running automatic tests each night with the scripts for Freddy with BC Container Helper. And could I run the tests with and without features with a simple trick, or?
Yeah, of course. I mean, depends on the tooling that you use. That's a part of your initialization for your test code unit. You can have like, okay.
But I must program it by PowerShell or something like that.
Sorry, what?
I must program it by PowerShell or something like that to enable the feature or not.
Oh, it depends on the tooling that you use. Microsoft actually allows you to run the certain code units like your test code unit with certain feature enabled. I'm not sure if it's actually a separate command or it's part of your container creation process. I need to validate this and probably can get back to you with it. It's definitely a part of the creation of your container process where you can define what Microsoft feature is enabled. But in case if you're using any other app, it's part of your initialization for your test code unit. So you can say, now I wanted to enable this feature, please run my test with enabled one. Then you can have another code unit that actually have a certain test for disabled feature if you need this kind of validation. Does it make sense?
Yeah, maybe I send an email.
I mean, again, we can go offline and actually you can show me this case, please. Oh,
Okay.
cool. You kind of had some aura. Do you have any more questions, please? Oh, okay. No. I have some light there, so I don't see you. But
Depending on your programming throughput, you're potentially putting into the code lots of application areas, always depending on how many features you introduce. What's your approach to basically removing them, especially in consideration of doing it maybe in an automated way? Have you had any experience with that, or are you basically keeping in the 100 application areas indefinitely?
no, so as I mentioned, you should have this feature life cycle defined. So you should have a clear date when your feature should be cleaned up. When this date is coming, you had a review process. There might be certain conditions that preventing you from disabling this. It might be that some of the key users went on holiday and you need to wait for another 2 weeks to come back to actually test it. And as you had this date and this date comes, we need to make sure that you are removing this feature condition from your code base. So you're actually deleting this if is enabled from your code. You're deleting the old legacy code base. And this is this cleanup phase. In most cases, it's kind of short. And you probably can outsource it to some of your juniors in the team. But my recommendation is first document this process properly and actually doing this not on the like a final code base, just not go through all the condition, but actually do the cleanup based on change sets that you introduce within this feature. So then you actually comfortable to say that, yes, I kind of clean up everything from my feature. Is there an answer in your question?
Yeah, so you're basically doing it with a manual labor.
Yeah.
Manual introduction, no automation in that.
No automation. As I said, if you use an open feature for AL, you probably can write a small PowerShell to replace all, but you still wanted to clean up the conditions. Replace all will still keep in code this kind of if enabled, but this will be all, and we know that all enabled always. So it's like your feature is always enabled. But yeah, so that's part of the kind of manual work.
Thank you.
Sure. No? No more. Good. Anyway, if you have any more questions, you can reach out to me through the conference day. And thank you very much for coming. If we switch to